to today's Hacker Hangout. Today's feature, we have the RugDoc. So I'll have her introduce herself in a minute or two. But just want to welcome everybody. I know we're trying to have these a little bit more frequently. So at this point, moving forward, we'll probably have them on a weekly basis. And you'll see the events posted in the Discord. So you can essentially join them at your best convenience. So just a quick housekeeping announcement. I know you guys have been most of you guys have been following us on our socials. Just an early plug here. You know, don't forget to follow us on our socials, our Twitter, here in Discord, as you guys already are. We have a Telegram announcement channel as well as subscribing to our email list. There you'll get the most up to date in terms of our Immunify monthly newsletter. That's via obviously the subscriber list or the newsletter. And then also bug bounties that are recently launched. Here, if you want to keep an eye on them, that is in the new bug bounties channel. So without further ado, we have the RugDoc on today's call. So I'll let her introduce herself, and then we can, as usual, the event channel is where all the action happens, and that's where we'll be answering questions. If you want to hop on stage, you're free to hop on stage. Just raise your hand, and I'll bring you on. We can go from there. But please give everybody a quick intro, and everybody give the RugDoc a warm welcome in the chat. Maybe some audio issues there. We'll give it a minute for her to diagnose that. We got might be having an audio issue here. Uh-oh. Having an audio issue, so give her a minute. Give her a minute and I'll bring her back on stage. Oh, I see you there, but still can't hear you. I don't know if you can hear me. Oh, gone again.
All right, let's see. Is this one working?
Yeah, we got you now.
Yes, and I can hear you guys. We love technical difficulties.
All right. Glad to have you.
Yeah, glad to be here. Thanks for dealing with me exiting entering a few times until it finally worked.
No, it was all good. It was kind of funny because I didn't give your intro, but I was just telling everybody to just follow us on socials. And I was like, all
Nice.
right, now you can hop in with your intro. But hey,
Perfect.
hop in with your intro.
Yeah, definitely. Hi there. So my name is Doc or RugDoc, or you can use my initials L. And I run RugDoc IO and Paladin Blockchain Security. Through both of these companies, our goal is to make DeFi a safer and more accessible space for everybody. We've been around for about a year and a half at this point, and over at RugDoc, we're really a community-focused DeFi safety and education initiative. So we try to empower investors to analyze and mitigate their risk, as well as encourage developers in best practices with regards to their smart contract. We more or less operate like an independent ratings organization where we give a risk assessment based off potential risks to the investor that we can find in a basic smart contract. And then our sister organization, Paladin Blockchain Security, is a full service cybersecurity company. And over there, we really are a comprehensive developer and audit services firm. And we try to provide everything from consultation, pen testing, to auditing for blockchain technologies of any scale. Um, I have a background that is actually completely unrelated to DeFi. I was originally in academia and I PhD in engineering. However, pretty quickly that I actually hated academia, which is kind of a bad thing when you get a PhD in something. So I exited out to intellectual property law, which is one of the few things that you can do outside of academia once you have a very PhD. And I worked at a large Silicon Valley law firm dealing with, intellectual property prosecution for all sorts of interesting tech companies. And I was really inspired by all of the entrepreneurial spirit and just everything that goes into founding a company. Um, I didn't know it at the time, but it laid a really nice foundation for when a friend introduced my husband and I to decentralized finance. We jumped in. We'd been long term crypto users and holders. So we were very excited to basically be able to suddenly use the crypto assets that we've been holding for years and use them as active investments. However, my husband quickly got rugged for a pretty substantial amount of money, which made us think about, the risks that we weren't thinking about when we jumped in and the risks that a lot of people when they first join in DeFi don't really think about. Um, Luckily, that academic background did come in handy because I was able to use my programming knowledge from back then into understanding Solidity and a couple other like languages that are useful in smart contracts. And I started to use that knowledge to be able to analyze our own investments. And I quickly started just sharing them with the broad community, which became the companies that are running along today. So that's the long story.
That's awesome. Quick question. What type of engineering do you have a background in? And also, how did you end up like getting interested in transitioning into Web3? Was it something that uh, like what essentially piqued your interest about it for you to take a deeper dive and start going down the rabbit hole like the rest of us?
Yeah, so I originally had a background in mechanical engineering, but I did a lot of machining type work. So I wound up having to develop quite a bit of hardware and software to do really weird types of tests. So I was specifically looking at how you could deal with the mechanics of certain materials. And one of the ways that you do that is just by stretching things, pulling things, shearing things, and just applying really tiny, weird little forces, which they don't make standardized machines for. So if I wanted to carry out a test, I probably had to develop a machine to carry out the test, which is where I started collecting a variety of just strange programs into my repertoire, Like we're talking everything from just like LabVIEW to like C++ and everything in between. Python, Java. And so that translated really nicely into Solidity. Like I said, my husband and I have been in crypto for a long time. He entered in first, so he was really early into Bitcoin back in, I believe, about 2012 or so, because he was working in like casinos and online gambling and how to take advantage of that sort of just taking advantage of like online casinos essentially. And those casinos back then were starting to pay out in cryptocurrency because it was a way to kind of get around legislation in jurisdictions that these casinos weren't supposed to be operating in, as online casinos operating everywhere. So he started hoarding like quite a bit of Bitcoin, and that kind of got him to be a true believer. I think it kind of hit some of his philosophical ideals. When he and I met a couple years later, he immediately tried to convince me about the wonders of crypto, and I was like, "Oh, that's nice. Thanks for sharing your funny money with me. I am an academic, and I don't care." But then once I really started to watch him at work and be able to move currency around, and even back then, just like pay people instantaneously on the blockchain, I was like, oh, actually, this seems like it has quite a bit of utility. So I jumped on in and started, playing around with originally Bitcoin, then Ethereum as that came around, and then really started to get interested in DeFi with the development of the Ethereum blockchain, but really didn't get into it until a mutual friend showed us, DeFi with the rise of like early DeFi summer and the start of like the BNB chain network. So once I saw that and I saw that transactions were super fast, instantaneous, that I could not only just deal with these financial technologies, but really the blockchain opened up all sorts of very interesting just technological applications. I was really interested in figuring out how you could use decentralized technology and everything that we've been starting to see in the community as it's risen. But like I said, we got a pretty harsh awakening once he got rugged for a large sum of money, and it's been really interesting to be able to dive into the security space, especially as everything has been developing over the last few years. Because, like they say, a day in DeFi is really like a month anywhere else, and a month is like a year. And that's so true. Just in the short time, the year and a half that RugDoc and Paladin have been around, we've really seen just an explosion of so many different uses and applications, and the ever increasing need for security and just technical understanding in this space.
No, that's some great points. Actually, to kind of backtrack a little, because you talk about like, for example, your husband getting rugged. Is that how the name the rug dot came about? And with the combination of your background, because I think that's kind of interesting. Like, number one, I find that everybody's journey into the space is fairly interesting. Everybody has a different story. But I kind of find the name a little bit ironic. I mean, I'm pretty sure you already know, and everybody's told you that there is like a carpet cleaning company, the Rug Doctor.
Yes,
Is that
yes.
where you kind of got the name from, or how that come about?
Yeah, so I mean, I never expected to actually create a business in the space. I was just kind of doing it, originally my own personal investments, and then pretty quickly after just community assessments because I was already looking at these contracts for, you know, myself. So I figured, it doesn't take me that long to just throw it into a Telegram chat, and anybody who has their opinion on it can let me know and help me refine my process and request reviews. Um, so I just kind of, as a joke, not expecting it to actually become a company, was like, haha, I'm a doctor and I'm here looking at rugs. How stupid would it be to call myself the rug doc, like the carpet cleaning company, because I'm cleaning rugs? And, well, with a stupid name. But, I could still rebrand. It's not the end of the world. Something that I
It's
have been
actually
considering.
it's
But that is,
actually funny. I think it's ironic, and I actually love the name. I don't know, like yeah, so I think it fits the space very well. The fact that you're also in the security side of things, I think fits the name perfectly.
Thanks. I've
uh,
certainly had mixed feelings as we've grown, especially as you get people from more the TradFi space come in. They're just like, that's a stupid name. There's a carpet cleaning company, right? And I'm like, of course I know there's a carpet cleaning company, dude. Like, yes, I'm aware.
companies getting into DeFi security.
Ironically, we actually have swept them on our SEO. So, like now, if you actually search RugDoc into
Oh, that's,
Google and any social media, it just comes up as DeFi. So I kind of feel bad.
that's awesome. That's awesome. Yeah, I guess I mean we have a few questions in the chat, so we can go ahead and address them. So one of them or two of them actually. So first one from Mohammed. He's asking, does RugDoc have some internal monitoring tools which were developed for their monitoring activity? This is in reference to your auditing efforts. If he's not mistaken, oh yeah, okay, actually yes. So yeah, Mohammed, RugDoc does have association with Paladin Security. But I guess to address this first question, to see if you guys have any internal monitoring tools developed for your monitoring activity.
Yeah, so actually, first off, at RugDoc, we really don't do audits. That is our community-oriented end. So we provide very basic, brief smart contract reviews that anybody can, if you want us to take a look at your NFT, contract, your tokens as an investor or as a developer. That's what we're there for, as well as just provide community support and education, so people are able to make better decisions for their own investment styles, and we can try to help out when there are problems in the space as it relates to investor-oriented security. But Paladin is we also own Paladin. Paladin is our audit firm, and so over there we're really focusing on audits and just other developer tools like pen testing and even contract development and consultation. Um, for our own monitoring activity, we actually do all of our reviews at RugDoc by hand because we've found just by other people in the space and playing around with some of our own algorithmic checkers, they miss things because smart contracts and especially again, well, we're not an audit, but really looking at these smart contract reviews, finding exploits is truly an exercise in human ingenuity. So it seems to just be this race between very smart exploiters and very smart white hats and auditors in terms of finding out new ways to destroy and then prevent the destruction of these smart contracts. So we've just found that algorithmic checkers tend to miss things because it is so easy to just change a name, change a function, just change the order of something, and essentially just trick an algorithmic checker. So it no longer really finds problems that can easily break or exploit a code. So there, we mostly rely on just like a team of reviewers who go through contracts and then peer review them with each other. But we do have our own internal just picking up trends, networks, chains, really trying to parse out more like analytics so we know what to focus on and we can kind of figure out where we should be expending efforts. So we're able to pick up, different types of contract trends pretty early or, different bouts of activity on different chains or new types of exploits. And those are things that we do in deep.
Got you, got you. I know a few people are just messaging me back saying there is some, choppiness in your mic. So just an FYI there.
Oh,
Also,
okay.
so and then Mohammed does have another question. So he's asking from a security angle, what is your current opinion of the merge of ETH 2.0? Do you think that new vectors will exist? And he's asking this because he's not deeply familiar with the whole EVM space.
Sure. So the ETH merge is just changing how they're moving from, between like proof of work and proof of stake. Um, I honestly, I'm not sure if it will introduce new vectors. Um, when I'm usually looking at investor oriented risk, we mostly see those things in um, chains, smaller chains than just like the actual blockchain of Ethereum, and we're really looking more like smart contract risk, bridge risk, exchange risks, especially like centralized exchange risks. Um, so when you're actually changing the underlying fundamentals of how you're providing value to your token, I'm not sure there's going to be the same amount of risk that, I'm usually thinking about, which is this protocol going to break? Um, is something going to drain funds? Can somebody exploit a network in a new way? Um, my gut feeling says probably nothing like that. But that said, who knows? It's a very, changing the way a fundamental chain works is really complicated. And there's going to be potentially like unintended consequences. Um, I, like I said, my gut says we probably not. Um, are we still getting like internet connection issues, by the way?
It's okay for me. I don't know if you guys have any issues, just pop in, but maybe your
Still
mic
doing
is
good?
still. Yeah, I mean it's okay for me, so I'm not sure about everybody else.
Gotcha. All right, perfect. Yeah. Um, so like I was saying, my gut feeling says it's probably not going to introduce the sorts of risks that we think about from, the investor perspective of can funds be lost or can things be exploited. It is of course possible when you're changing the fundamentals of, an entire blockchain, that something could just get stuck somewhere. We've seen problems with other networks where their timings have changed, and so you basically just get like block creep, which can introduce some problems down the road. Um, I'm not sure that'll be an issue. Yeah, I guess it's one of those like we'll wait and find out and see if there's any problems. But generally, when we're thinking about risk in crypto and especially in DeFi, it's coming from a contract, a centralized exchange, or a bridge.
Got you. That makes sense. We had another Mohammed coming through with the questions, which is awesome. So he said, since you mentioned manual auditing, is there any methodology you would like to share, so that white hats have some sort of structure rather than just randomly looking at the files in the repo?
Well, what do you mean by structure? So we also just kind of look at the files in the repo and we try and put everything together. Over at RugDoc, when we're just doing these quick contract reviews, we won't even look at anything in a GitHub repo. We wait until something is actually deployed on the chain to review it, just to conserve our resources. Unless it's someone that we're doing a consultation for, and then we'll go and help them create a code that stands up well before they deploy. But over at Paladin, we're also just looking at GitHub repos. We usually just try and start with the more complicated contracts that are going to be calling the smaller contracts in to try and figure out how well things are playing together, and if we're going to start to see compatibility or library issues or things like that. Once you start to call other contracts, that's usually where you find problems. Um, but we don't really have a particular methodology. Our methodology is really starting with the complex contract, seeing what it calls, going through that, and then going through the smaller contract. We try and go through with kind of a chain of logic. So when we are thinking about, let's see, so when we're thinking about how we go through our audits. We're really just trying to find that flow, and just really going through and making sure that everything makes sense. I know a lot of our auditors like to actually print out the repo and then like start to actually go through that and make notes and try and underline, circle, and figure out the actual, almost like doing a diagram to figure out where different functions are being used. Um, that's probably about the best methodology as we have. Everybody does it a little bit different.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting question that comes up every time we do one of these hacker hangouts and we have a guest or someone that pops in. Everybody's methodology in terms of how they assess the risk, how they go about in doing the initial analysis to their process for actually deep diving into the code. Everybody's approach is different. You got some people that use more on the automated tool side to do the initial scan. We got some people that just do it visually. And so I think it's interesting that there's not really one quote unquote right way to actually, diagnose these things. There's multiple avenues. It's one that kind of it's usually one that a specific hacker prefers or a method that they feel the most comfortable with. To get into some more of
Yeah.
yeah, I don't know if you have
Yeah.
thoughts around that.
Yeah, for me, I think it's just really how people have different learning styles and communication styles. It's going to follow through in auditing. Some people are going to be more visual, some people are going to be, a little bit more on the tools and then putting things together. So it's just whatever makes you comfortable. And as a side note, that's also why we generally recommend any large, especially complex protocols, but more than one audit, because auditing and exploits are this like very human exercise. It really helps to get different perspectives and to understand, have different people who have different logical flows go through your code to really make sure that you're not missing something, because it's very easy if you're someone who likes to diagram. Sometimes you might miss things that someone who is using a particular type of automated checker is going to find, and vice versa.
Yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense. Before we proceed to the next question, just letting everybody know that verbally here before I post it in the chat that there is a PO-op for this Hangout. So if you need one or if you want to claim one, just DM me and I'll send you over a link to claim. But I'll post that in the chat shortly. So the next question from gmhacker.eth. He wants to know, what would you say are the most important skills or knowledge for a white hat slash auditor? Is it something like, because he gave examples of like EVM deep knowledge, attacker mentality, overall CS skills. He just wants to get your take in terms of what you think are the most important skills that someone should have in this space.
Sure. Of course, you're going to need to have a base of your actual like CS skills, right? If you're someone who's not going to be competent in Rust, Solidity, or just general programming, it's going to be really hard for you to, do much in the space of white hatting and auditing. But that said, for me, it actually turns out to be a combination of comfortable with just EVM or DeFi, right? Like you're comfortable with the concept of smart contracts and how everything works, um, as well as just has a good logical programming understanding. We've had and worked with some more traditional CS software engineer and developer types before, to see how they would perform as auditors. And they tend to just be, it's really hard for them to understand and actually be good auditors, despite the fact that they have very good, programming skills and might be like really competent in Rust or Solidity or any one of these languages standalone. They might even be a really good developer. But auditing is completely different. Um, and so it takes, I really think, a little bit more of an abstract skill set of understanding the complex mechanics of how blockchain and DeFi works, as well as figuring out how things can possibly go wrong, right? Um, like I said, you just see these people who have really good understandings of deep logic and how it plays into the big picture, and those are people who usually become students.
Got you. Hopefully that answers your question, GM Hacker. I mean, because I think also the fact that there's so many resources, and again, like going back to what I was saying previously, which is everybody's foray into this space is different. How they got here is different. We've got a a huge wide range of people that are currently in this immunified community. You got everyone from high school students to academics to people that are much older than the than the average crowd, I would say. It's funny because we had Giannis from D-Dob maybe a month or two back, and he was laughing that he feels like he's like the old man in the space. But I told him, I was like, you're the old man, but you're still in a very young, fast moving space. So kind of mentality at that point. But that's awesome that it's always awesome to get people's take in terms of what they think is important to be successful in the space. We got two
Yeah,
questions. Oh yeah, go ahead. Go ahead. Would love
yeah,
to get.
and yeah, it really goes down to just how you are as an auditor, like we talked about, and like you just mentioned again, everybody comes from a different background in a different space, and they're going to have a different way of approaching their audit or their pen testing. Um, but like I said, for me, from what I've seen in myself and from just like far more savvy auditors that we've worked with, is going to be they just have like this deep understanding of the connect parts that goes into um, the execution of a DeFi smart contract. And then they're also very good at just understanding the overall logic flows throughout and interconnected with different.
Gotcha. Yeah, that makes sense. So we got two questions from Nadir. I'll go through the first one, which is, what is your opinion on standard audit procedures where protocols claim auditors are just looking for money when no bugs are found? Should there be a contingent model based on vulnerabilities that can be implemented on solo audits, and how would that work in your opinion?
Sure. So generally, I would say even things that seem very basic and very common, like a lot of these very simple, basic, we'll say like these swap farm contracts, um, even though they may seem very simple, a lot of them still have underlying vulnerabilities that aren't necessarily apparent at the time that that particular project was launched. But because the space moves so fast and new things are always being added to it, again, you just wind up with one of these logical flaws and it will wind up breaking what was previously thought of a very easy basic code. Um, we've seen things with just like the introduction of different types of tokens or, the different types of bridges that might appear when there just becomes this incompatibility that was not really present. And so that's why I would say audits are still generally a very good idea if you're going to be taking any substantial degree of investor money because things break as the space moves and evolves. Um, and again, even if you think you're doing something very basic, it's hard to get outside your own head, and it's always really nice to be able to see somebody else's perspective on your code because there's things that you're going to have missed or that you're not going to have thought of. It's why both RugDoc and Paladin we really do rely on like a peer system because what one person finds or thinks may not necessarily be the same as what someone else finds and thinks, and critical mistakes can be missed if you're just relying on only one vantage. Um, that said, there are certainly a lot of audit firms out there that are just honestly cash grabs, and they'll provide like a bad audit or just like an automated check audit or just something that is absolutely worthless. So it's really important to understand that not every audit firm is built the same. Um, and it's important to honestly do your research and figure out um, which audit firm will suit the needs, especially if you're dealing with a more complex protocol. You're going to want to make sure that you're dealing with a firm that has experience in that particular type of project or contract or just logic implementation, or will have the skills to be able to figure out what you've done if you've done something completely novel. Um, so that I think is the best answer. Of course, there's cash grabs in the space. I still think audits are generally a very good idea because things break all the time in DeFi as things advance. But definitely do your research in terms of figuring out who's going to be the best fit for your team and your project.
For sure, definitely. That's some that I think sometimes easily overlooked. I have spoken with a few projects that like in person that have felt that they could essentially circumvent the audit and just essentially run a white hat bug bounty or like a bug bounty program on Immunify. I mean, you're certainly welcome to do that, but I don't think I agree with you. I don't think that audits should essentially be pushed aside. I think they have their place, and I think they're important as well. Um, and so I think it's also important to address that part of it as well.
I agree. And it's not, if you're really trying to do something that's going to be a large protocol and is going to be dealing with large amounts of funds, that comes with a lot of responsibility that people often don't take as take as they should. And bug bounties are absolutely critical and absolutely have a place in the ecosystem, and they should be in place, especially if you're a novel type of protocol, especially if you're dealing with any large amount of funds. But they're not a replacement for an audit. Like, really, you should be ideally having someone check over as you're in development, have an audit firm go through and really try to parse through for potential exploits or potential flaws. And then you're going to want to, every time you have a new element that's introduced into your project, frankly, that should probably be audited too. And we see that with, like large responsible protocols, they will come back, and every time that they add, a new type of lending platform or a new type of game or a new type of token, they're getting that re-audited. And quite frankly, as someone who has been auditing some of these ecosystems, what these large experienced companies thought were originally going to be just fine to add a new thing, and they're just doing an audit because that's what they do. Critical functions and critical flaws are found, and a bug bounty program should still be in place on top of that, because there's going to be, auditors are human, they really are. And even auditors that do their very best and are very skilled and have multiple people in a team look through their work, we're still human at the end of the day. You want the broader community, you want as many.
Uh, okay, cool. So I think you got cut off there at the end. So I get, and then the secondary question I was actually asked by Nadir, which also is talking about auditing. Just want to get your opinion to see whether or not market conditions affect, or current market conditions affect the overall view of protocols, to see whether or not they get a pass on an audit or delay it.
Um, that's probably going to come down to the individual protocol. I still firmly believe that any any protocol that's launching that expects to deal with any degree of community funds ought to have an audit, because that's just the responsible thing to do. That said, if a project it's a hard market right now, although maybe there's a little bit of hope now that things have been like picking up for the last week. Um, maybe they want to just delay their project overall until they can really do their due diligence. Um, because you don't want projects to, even though it's hard, even though fundraising is difficult right now, just launching something that winds up breaking or winds up getting immediately exploited. That's not responsible. Um, yeah, so I know a lot of audit companies right now are not necessarily working with the community conditions. And so I think we've been seeing um, quite a bit of, these smaller firms kind of get shook out of the market because, they honestly probably weren't offering a great audit and a quality product to begin with. And on top of that, if you only have the funds to deal with, say, like one audit now because of the broader conditions, you're probably not going to deal with tiny firm A. You're going to want to go with a more established firm. So there's certainly quite a few conditions. I wouldn't say you should skip an audit. It's better to delay a launch than to actually not do your due diligence before taking investor money. And I should also add to my previous comment that just because a firm is small doesn't necessarily mean that they are a lower quality firm. And just because a firm is large doesn't mean that they are a quality firm. And I think quite a few people who are in this community dealing with auditors and, the more technical side, we certainly have seen both of these come true. And we'll see, really solid small auditors who can honestly provide quite a lot of insight and generate a really good amount of information to a developer team. And we've also seen a lot of large firms, frankly, kind of sell out and just be out for pure profit instead of keeping to a poor quality assessment like they used to. So again, a lot of this comes down to like do your due diligence on the audit firm too and figure out who's honestly going to be the best fit for your project.
But I also like because I've been in this space for a while. It's also like people that are also combing for that brand name as well, which is why most of the time they're always looking for the larger companies, whether or not they are effective or not, or whether or not the people or the auditors that are on that specific project auditing their code actually do a good job or not. But it's really more so that brand name of having that as like, oh, X and X has audited our code, and it kind of gives the community a little bit of that, like okay, cool, we're more comfortable now that with the project because we had this big name firm come in and audit that code. So it kind of plays in the role of that brand awareness, assuaging the community's fears, kind of avenue.
Yeah, definitely. But I will say, as someone who works often with chains, like just like actual foundational blockchain teams, oh man, like they'll enter into a partnership with a particular brand name to deal with the community assurance, we'll say. And then they wind up having to just hire, one or several other audit firms on top of that, because even though they may have made their official partnership with, a particular firm with a reputation, they quickly come to realize that that firm is not going to be effective at meeting their needs, and they wind up having to pay even more to actually get work checked and redone.
Yeah, that makes sense. That definitely makes sense. We got another question. This one is from Mark. How would you recommend mapping smart contract functions to other smart contracts or APIs?
Sure. So there are some ways that you can do this if you start to like parse through remix, but like I said, honestly, a lot of team actually goes through and prints out contracts manually and then starts actually like drawing on things and connecting dots. um, So this is going to come down to, again, just how the investor feels about it, or not the investor, how the auditor feels about it. Like, what is their best logic flow? What is what are they most comfortable with, and what is going to be the most effective strategy for them to go through? Um, so yeah, how you decide to map these like larger chains is going to depend on your learning style. Maybe it's more visual. Maybe you prefer to just have like a bunch of desktops and like literally throw everything out on a different desktop and start to actually map things together. I know a lot of people devise their own scripts. So just based off of, a method that they may have gone through manually. And so they'll start to automate that some sort of a script to tie things together. Um, I know a few people who've even repurposed just software from completely other fields, like microscopy fields, and like more of the science fields, and they'll repurpose some of these open source scientific analytics, and they'll like reuse it to start to map out contracts. So it's going to be kind of a personal thing. I'm sorry, there's not a better, more definitive answer in terms of how you can map things. A lot of different ways. How do you do it manually? How can you automate what you do personally manually is going to be my best advice.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, it kind of goes back to what we spoke about previously, which is everybody's approach to this is a little bit different. So I would assume it would be safe to assume that how you essentially map these functions are also going to be, based on preference and how you essentially want to go about it. So moving into the next question. So we got a question from Nuko Nam. So he's asking, what contract or contracts of the entire RugDoc project is the team most nervous about? Can you highlight any contract uncertainties that keep the dev team highly alert?
Sure. So, as things develop in DeFi, we're always finding new fun ways that these new types of contracts can be exploited or just like their inherent flaws. I know when there was the whole entire kind of trend of like these Tomb Fork Genesis projects, those came with a lot of problems. And I think over at RugDoc, we're really concerned about investor security. We're just the most nervous about contracts that have a lot of inherent governance risk because those are things that, nobody can mitigate. That just means that you have to trust the team to not pull a function that's available to them, right? So if a certain type of base project, like a Genesis pool contract, has the ability to just drain funds after, say, 7 days or 48 hours, well, that's obviously going to be something that makes us very nervous because now you have this trending project and people are going to be jumping into all of the new ones without thinking because they just see, oh no, look at this, a new tomb fork for us to like try and make a quick buck on. And your average investor isn't really looking at these governance risks. So even though we'll like easily notate them and be like, there are inherent risks. This team can just drain funds after 7 days. It doesn't mean that they will. It's just something that is built into the base contract that all of these things are forked off of. But those are things that really make us nervous. When you have a common fork that is trending and that has inherent obvious risks to it, because you can't just flag all of them high risk, even though the contract may indeed be high risk, because then that's just going to, that would be ridiculous if everything on the website just said like high risk, high risk, high risk, because there's this base contract that's trending and, it's has the ability to move funds. So in those cases, we just, we have to flag them and we'll notate out the risk. Those, I think, are the sorts of things that make us the most nervous. Also, most new bridges are terrifying. Bridges have so many different types of risks in them, and that's where you see these giant exploits. Every time we're seeing like, some sort of a new bridge pop up, that's when it's like, well, okay, who can freeze the funds? Who can move the funds? Are there risks on the front side? Are there risks on the back end? risks in the contract? Are there risks on the original blockchain? Are there risks like in the middle of the bridge? Are there token compatibility risks? Is something going to completely depeg and make, your currency worthless on the other blockchain? Um, so yeah, those are the scenarios that really keep us up at night.
Since it's funny that you mentioned bridges, I was actually just reading a thread, which I'll throw in the chat in a little bit, from one of our triagers, Adrian, that just wrote a thread about the risks and why. Also, the same thing you said, why bridges are scary. So it's actually definitely given me a new perspective in actually the bridges that I've been using or taking a look at. Um,
Definitely. I'm honestly hoping that we do see the rise of, these layer zero solutions that make bridges obsolete, because bridges are where you really introduce the most risk to your investor and the protocol, right? Because we've seen so many of these large protocols just get drained. Harmony's bridge just got wrecked for, $100 million a couple weeks ago. Um, so it hits on so many different levels.
exactly, exactly. And it's kind of scary since like the whole narrative too is all about cross-chain compatibility and being able to move assets from one chain to another. So the fact that this is even it's pretty much on almost everybody's security radar makes it a little bit nerve-wracking when when I'm actually utilizing some of these tools.
Definitely. And that's why, like, I really honestly hope that we're able to move from being a cross chain to a multi chain solution. Um, so I, like so many other people, are just really waiting to see what these layer zero solutions can produce.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. So we got another question from Don Divine. So currently um he's saying, so he's being honest, saying that blockchain pen testing and auditing is difficult as far as understanding where to learn the capability. Just want to get your notes in terms of any good apps, sites, or mentors that, or people to follow that can assist with that issue.
Yeah. So I think the best place you want to start is to get a good foundation in some sort of beginner friendly, versatile language like JavaScript or Python. Get really good at JavaScript and Python. And so there are all sorts of tools and trainings that are out there right now that cover those, because they are such common languages. Um, and once you have a good foundation built up, I would say that's when you want to be able to move this coding experience into Solidity. The best way to learn a new language, honestly, is by just practicing, using it in practice, just writing that code. Reading docs isn't going to get you that far. You're really going to figure out what mistakes you're going to make and how to fix them once you're in action. So there are a couple like games out there, like these capture the flag games where you get like a vulnerable code presented to you and you need to write a plan to exploit it. That's a great way to really start thinking about, pen testing and auditing. Um, I know for Solidity, there's a couple of them out there that are really popular and fun. And so that's like for the Ether or like Damn Vulnerable DeFi, stuff like that. However, you do have to keep in mind that these games are really just going to give you a basic foundation of how to understand exploits and the logic behind them, but they usually are written on like outdated Solidity versions, older libraries, stuff like that, right? So there's going to be differences when you actually take the next step and move into looking at what smart contracts are out there today. So I would say start just digging around in the community and figuring out what smart contracts are popular at that point in time. Start looking at them. Go into their GitHub. Go look on actual like blockchain. throw it into Remix, go see how you feel about it. And that's when you're going to start to see, functions that maybe these games and maybe your Java and Python experience didn't prepare you for, like what is going to be a reentrancy guard or a delegate call and stuff like that. And then I would say, honestly, start to get real experience. Go hang out, in the Immunify community or any of these auditor communities, especially bug bounty communities. These are going to be great places where you can start to talk with other people, where you can see other people who are finding these exploits in current contracts, and take notes, keep a library. Um, any automated tool that you might develop, any script that you might develop later on, these are probably going to, you're probably going to want some sort of a library of common exploits and common bugs to go through. So start paying attention to what people are finding in their bug bounties, or just like talk to other people, on Reddit. That's how you're going to really start to collect these current modern pen testing skills. Um, and then, of course, I would say you're going to want to stay up to date. So, a lot of that is going to come into just staying involved with the audit community and keeping in pretty current contact. I would also say one thing that you can do is if there's a particular audit firm that you really trust, go apprentice for them. We've certainly taken um, interns before, and we'll help get them on the team and figure out where their skills are. And of course, by watching us audit and watching an audit team audit, you're going to pick up a lot of skills, and a lot of especially soft skills that you can't really easily be taught through just a game or through parsing code. Really understanding how to dissect a contract and how to start mapping things out in a way that's going to work for you, cleaning out further vulnerabilities. So that's how I would say.
That's awesome advice. I think like a lot of it is just really getting your hands dirty. There's a big difference, and I've spoken to a lot of white hats and devs as well. A lot of devs that are self-taught, and they're telling me that there's a big difference between reading and studying the code on the screen, or even in a book, if that's the way that you go, versus actually getting your hands dirty and really writing code and really trying to pen test, really trying to break things down and understand logic. There's a huge difference between actually getting your hands dirty and kind of the visual aspect of things. And you hit that right on the head.
Definitely learn through experience. It's how everybody I know who has gotten good at anything in life, not even just auditing, it's just from trying, practicing, failing, learning, doing it again better the next time.
Exactly, exactly. It's always the same kind of process that I've outlined to a lot of people. When everybody gets frustrated in the beginning, you kind of have these phases of learning, right? So it's kind of broken down into thirds. So the first third is always going to be like what I call the suck phase. Everything's always going to suck. You're going to get frustrated because there's no rhythm. You're just learning everything, and as you kind of progress and kind of run through that suck phase, there's that middle phase where you're starting to get into rhythm. Everything's starting to make sense. So it's kind of that clicking phase. And then that third phase is when everything kind of becomes a little bit more natural. You can navigate your way around the activity or the space that you're currently in. So it's always the beginning that's the hardest. And if you can get that over that initial hump, the back end is not that bad. So it's kind of how my approach is. So we got another question from Mohammed. So he's wanting to know, since you have some dealings with investors or investor type activity, what is your personal opinion about the market recovery? And also, can you give a few words about this quote unquote metaverse thing?
I think I have answered what is the metaverse to pretty much everybody I know who's not in crypto, as well as many people in crypto. So great. um, Well, I think the overall market is going to be volatile and wavy just because we're seeing, these global economic trends right now coming out of the COVID pandemic and all of the relief that so many countries pushed through. We're seeing a lot of large developed countries and undeveloped countries too dealing with inflation and supply chain disruptions. Um, so the only real way to deal with inflation, unfortunately, is to cause people to spend less money, which is to basically induce a recession, which certain countries have been trying to stave off by, reducing their federal rates, right? The interest rate or increasing the federal interest rates. Um, so as long as we're going to see, a lot of our economic countries dealing with inflation, real estate instability, supply chain instability, I think we're just going to have really wavy macro trends. I also think things could certainly get worse. I can't tell you with any particular uncertainty um, what something is or isn't going to do. Anybody who claims that they can predict the market is either very stupid or is a liar. So I personally think things could get worse. Things might just hang out about the same. I think overall, we're going to just see a lot of just nation, maybe some inflation, and things are just going to be, we're not going to have a true bull market run for the foreseeable future. As long as we're just trying to deal with these macro uncertainties and, these inflation problems. Because all of these things tie together, rampant inflation in the US is tied to, the housing lending problems in China. And, that all ties back to oil and fuel uncertainties in Europe, which all ties back to, cooking oil deviations and supply chain problems in Asia. We're a global economy, so everything's connected. And we're going to, um, as long as these problems exist for the foreseeable future, which I suspect they will, we're just going to see a lot of. I think we're just going to see a lot of what we've been seeing, and maybe things will go lower, maybe things will stay about the same. Whether that lasts for 6 months or 2 years, I honestly can't tell you. I think anybody with any certainty can. Um, the good thing is, DeFi in particular offers so much more than just quick cash grabs, which is what I think we saw in this DeFi summer. We just saw the very basic rise of these technologies and just like these really almost like Ponzi schemes that got people interested in everything. But none of those were really sustainable technologies. And I think the good thing is these sorts of cash grab Ponzi's got a lot of people's interest, and people started really looking and entering DeFi. We've had crazy amounts of just volume and new users moving in, which has been awesome to see because now you're having people who are DeFi competent. And so now, whenever we have, a more sustainable development of the ecosystem, which I think is what we're heading towards, I think you're going to have more users primed to be able to take advantage. And you're also just seeing more development right now, like much more technological applications than just creating, the next sort of form. People are really starting to think about how these decentralized technologies can be applied into real estate, into the legal process, or into all sorts of things. So I guess that's about as comprehensive an answer as I can give you. I don't know what's going to happen. Things are going to stick around as long as there's just broad market volatility, which I suspect there will be for a bit. But we're seeing a lot more sustainable development in the space, which is really nice to see. And there's more users who are going to be able to take advantage of that now.
Definitely, for sure. I think it's same things that I've been seeing as well. Um, so I spoke with a few, because people in my circle. So in the first crypto winter, the development, there was still development, but it wasn't as large of an activity as there is during this past kind of bear market downtrend that we were having just most recently. So they're telling me during their observations, this one has seen actually significantly more activity both on the building side, as well as people just turning out projects, versus the last one that turned a lot of people away. So it's good to definitely see in this space. But I do echo your sentiments in the fact that no one's gonna know what's gonna happen in the next you know even week up until a month to however long that you want to take a look at this. Unless one of you guys got a crystal ball, go ahead and rub that for us and tell us what you see. So we got if you recluse that has a question which he wants to know, what do you think are the most complex types of contracts, like such as swappers or bridges or something of that sort?
Lending protocols. It's usually lending protocols. Those things are so freaking complicated. It's always really funny when we've seen, on the audit side, somebody who comes in, they're just like, oh, we're just like a curve fork. It's like, oh, you're just a curve fork. Like, this is going to be complicated. Um, so anything that's dealing with, you know, for projects and lending is going to be usually those complicated. Those have a lot of moving parts to them.
Got you, got
But
you.
like I said earlier, bridges have tons of risk. Bridges contracts are not necessarily the most complex. So the most complex projects from our experience are lending and curving protocols, but bridges introduce so much risk on different levels because you're taking the risk on one blockchain, transporting it to risk that could exist on another blockchain. There's risk in the middle. There's risk in the wrapped bridged asset. Lots of ways things can go wrong.
So do you think that, I guess in term if you're going to rank them, would you still say lending protocols rank above bridges in terms of complexity and risk?
The risks that you get from a lot of these lending protocols are going to just be complex contracts as well as, a lot of these softer factors where, you have to deal with liquidations and collateral. And if you're really trying to assess risk, especially as an investor, there's a lot of ways that can go. And as an auditor, those contracts pose some unique and interesting ways to get exploited. But I would say bridges probably will pose risks. There's just fewer bridges than there are, different types of lending protocol contracts. So you're
Right.
probably, as an investor, more likely to run into a problem with a lending platform than you are with bridge, just because of economies of scale. But that's my assessment on it.
That makes sense. That definitely makes sense. Okay, so we got like two more questions, and I know we're coming up soon on our time, and I want to be make sure that we hit our mark here. So we got two questions from Pangolin. So his first one is, are there any reoccurring bugs you find by type? Um, like for example, like logic or reentrancy. Do you find those often?
Yeah, so there's a lot of different common smart contract bugs. Reentrancy is probably one biggest one, but it just on depends on the type of contract that you're looking at. There are all sorts of security relevant bugs. And you can even just go through by version, right? So there are certain types of blogs and channels where they're going to just find the different types of problems as they're found in the different Solidity versions. So, these can be things like reentrancy, they can be things like signed immutables, where you just get like these integer incompatibilities. You can just get different call data functions. So those are all pretty common, but the common ones, luckily, do have a pretty comprehensive story about it. Um, it looks like you also asked a little bit about cross-contract reentrancy attacks. So, of course, a reentrancy attack is going to be one of the most common attacks in, an EVM smart contract. Um, and I think this was how Cream has gotten exploited, at least initially. So there's like single function reentrancy, and then there's these cross function reentrancies, and then there's cross function reentrancies. The single function and the cross functions are the most commonly found. And so there's a good amount of guards and protections that are in place through different types of Ethereum best practices that you can look up on how to prevent these more basic types of reentrancy attacks. When we're talking about cross contract, it can really happen when there is a state or a function in one contract that is used in another contract, but the state is not fully updated before it's called. So you can get, let's see, different types of vulnerabilities, like the execution flow can be controlled by the attacker, and you can manipulate the contract state, or the value can be shared or used in a different contract, stuff like that. There's I'm sure you could like go through and figure out just based on the different types of cross contract attack that you're looking at, because of course, depending on what function is going to be causing these problems and what the problem is in the update, there's going to be different types of solutions. There's going to be not a one size fits all thing. You can't just throw like reentrancy guard and a cross reentrancy. So if you're looking to stop like the hijacking of execution flow, you're probably going to need to figure out like what's even being hijacked. And so for that, I would say that's going to come down to just like auditor or developer skill. Like how good are you at spotting these sorts of problems? And then in turn, like how good are you in creating a solution to prevent the hijacking of these functions? I would take a look at maybe some of these bigger, more technical blogs like Inspexco or something like that, and see like what some potential solutions have been, because I'm these types of attacks before, and they can give you some examples to hopefully inspire a solution for your particular problem.
Awesome, Pangolin. Hopefully that clears some things. Hopefully that answers your question and clears a few things up. I know he did post a link to a Medium article that kind of narrows down his question. But yeah, I know we're coming up on this time. I just want to first of all thank everybody for hopping on in. And then also again, like if you want a POAP claim link, shoot me over a DM or a friend request, and I'll send you over a link. RugDoc, if you have any last words or things you want to kind of share with the community, I'll give you the floor for the next few minutes.
Sure. So I think especially as you wonderful people who are involved with ImmuneFi and are probably, savvier developers and auditor community in DeFi, or learning to be, it's really important to understand the needs of the community as they change. Sometimes it's really hard to understand like the macro picture when we're so focused on looking at the contract and the code and the flow and the logic. But it's really important to still stay in touch with the broader community and really understand unique risks that may even seem like softer risk elements, like governance risks that are relevant to your investors, because these are things that are really going to start to set, your audit firms apart and your auditors apart. When you can really understand and fix problems that both investors and developers are looking for, that's when you're able to really set yourself apart. It's so easy to either just on the investor side focus solely on like token risks or governance risks and not think about the underlying contractual risks. But opposite, as an auditor and a technical person, it's so easy to just get sucked into this narrow world view of nothing but the contract and nothing but the code. And there's a whole lot more problems that can pop through that are going to interact with your code and exist just outside of it. So being able to identify the problems that community is seeing and pull them out in things that you're reviewing, that's really a critical skill I cannot emphasize enough.
Awesome. That's some awesome that's an awesome closing and some wise words. I'm gonna share some of your social links or your Twitter as well as your website in the chat. If I guess like if someone wants to reach out to you, what would be the best way to reach out to you? Would it be Discord or would that be Twitter?
It could be any of them. Me and my team are constantly on our social media channels. So, depending on if you want more help with investor insecurity or just like basic contract reviews, I would say head towards RugDoc and you can DM me. You can hang out in our main chat, and one of the mods will redirect you to whoever the relevant party is on Discord or on Twitter or on Telegram. We're active all the time on all of the above. Or also, if you're really trying to get a more technical understanding, please hit us up over at Paladin, and you can like DM me, you can DM Marco, who's really like our lead auditor there. You can check us on Twitter, find us on Telegram. We're around.
Awesome. And to close things out on our end, as usual, as I plug, if you guys need a POAP, shoot me a DM. And if you would like to, and also don't forget to follow Immunify at our socials. So Twitter, here in Discord, as you guys already are, our Telegram announcements, and then also subscribing to our newsletter. We are starting to put out a monthly newsletter, just recapping the month at hand. So that's pretty much closes that out. RugDoc, I want to thank you for stopping by and providing some awesome insight and chatting with the community. It's definitely been a pleasure speaking with you and learning about your journey throughout the space.
Yeah, thank you for having me. Happy to chat, and I'll also definitely be subscribing to your newsletter. I love myself a good news.
Awesome. Appreciate that. So that wraps it up for today. Thank you guys so much for hopping on by. Like I said before, we'll be having more frequent hacker hangouts, trying to do them on a weekly basis now. So I'll see you on the next one. I'll let you guys know when the next one is there. So RugDoc, thank you so much for stopping by, and hopefully we can have you again on soon.
Would love to. See you and have a great day.
Awesome. Thank you guys. Thank you everybody. Thank you RugDoc.